It does not mean he has a right conception of the Messiah. It may very well be he thinks of it in terms of a coming king who immediately is going to throw off the Roman yoke and declare their freedom. But he has recognized in Jesus, the descendant of David, who fulfills the Old Testament prophecies of a coming Savior, a coming Messiah. The crowd try to hush him. He cries out the more. Jesus invites him. And then he comes to a very important point. He asks the man, "What do you want that I should do for you?" This is a question Jesus still asks us today, because one of the major steps in receiving from God is that we confess our need and admit we need something. This is a matter of humility that a lot of people are not quite willing to grant. Everyone who does counseling is familiar with the type of person who comes to you and asks for an interview. And they bring up some little problem, some school problem, some financial problem, when that may not be the trouble at all. Many a mother comes to you and is talking about some problem with her children, when the fact of the matter is that her marriage is on the rocks. And if she gets enough nerve and finds you sympathetic enough, she will then bring up the problem of her marriage. And you can do some marriage counseling and help her out. But she has to admit her need before you can move in on it. And here Jesus said, "What do you want? What do you want? What do you need?" And to those that are listening now, you might ask yourself the question, if Jesus asked you, "What do you want? What do you want?" What would you say? Would you do some superficial thing? Would you say, "I'd like a better job. I'd like better clothes. I would like a better car"? When your real need is to get along with your relatives, your wife, your husband, your children, your parents, with your employer, your employees, as the case may be. The whole range of human relations and your divine relationship with God is your real need, and yet you're hung up on a $5 a week raise or something like this. We have so many people striking for better wages, higher wages, as if that would solve their problem, when they could solve much more of the problem if they'd spend that same amount less on booze, and less on lottery tickets, and less on their tobacco, and less on their drugs. There's a young man in this general area now who may or may not sometime hear this telecast. And when I first was in his home, I felt led to speak to him about tithing, which is not usually a subject I'd use with beginners. But he had been a very heavy user of drugs, perhaps $40 a day or so. And I said to him, God expects a tithe, just to recognize he's the owner of the universe, that you're not the owner. But I said, I'll tell you, it won't cost you anything. If you'll take 9 years, and you will give me, during those 9 years of sober living as a Christian, what you've been spending on gambling, tobacco, booze, and drugs. I will pay your tithes for you, and out of what is left over, I will buy you a house and give it to you absolutely free at the end of the 9 years. The rate you've been spending money on sin has cost you far more than tithing would ever cost you. God asked for the tithe. Satan wants more than that. And here the question is, friends, what do you want? And Jesus made this man say what he wanted. And he said, Lord, receive my sight. He said, go your way. Your faith has made you whole. And then, when he was healed, he became a follower of Jesus. A question came up in a group the other day about a person who had been drinking, and his doctor told him he couldn't drink anymore. And he wanted to be healed, so he'd go back to his booze. I mean, we're not to do this. We are to seek healing and then come and make our healed bodies and healed minds and healed families, make them in the service of God. Let's continue to read. The Bible will read us then the story of a publican, Zacchaeus, which will be in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 9.
He entered Jericho and was passing through. And there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and rich. And he sought to see who Jesus was, but could not on account of the crowd, because he was small of stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, "He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner." And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost."
The common word for tax collector, of course, is publican. This was a chief tax collector, and as they often abused their privileges, he got rich at the process. The man is short, climbs a tree to see Jesus. The fact is that if you make the trouble to get ready for Jesus to come to you, he'll come your way. Zacchaeus got in the tree, Jesus came by the tree. You get in your tree, and Jesus will come by too. And then he said, "Come down. I'm going to come to your house today." Zacchaeus made him welcome, and when they'd gotten to his house, the people said, "He's a sinner. He collects taxes for the Romans. He can't be a good man. Jesus shouldn't go in with that man." The fact of the matter is, friends, there's nobody but sinners. There's nobody but sinners. There are saved sinners who've been converted, and unconverted sinners who are still lost. But we're all sinners. If Jesus came to your house or mine, he comes to the house of a sinner. And yet this man, when Jesus comes there, without Jesus giving him any teaching at all, this man already knows what he should do. He only has to be motivated to it. And we have a saying that we use frequently where I preach, and that is that the price of spiritual progress is obedience to the known will of God. The price, what does it cost? The price of spiritual progress is obedience to the known will of God. Zacchaeus already knew what he should do. He already knew he'd charged too much for taxes. He already knew he'd defrauded. And so when the presence of Jesus quickened his conscience, he said, "I'll give half I have to the poor." And then out of the remaining half, if there's anybody that actually can say, "I've wronged him, I've overtaxed him," I'll give him fourfold.